Okay, what you're about to watch is one of the strangest stories ever on how I survived moving to a new country with just 30 euro and then ended up living there for 8 years. So stick around and I'll tell you how I did this. Welcome back to Carl Travels. This is going to be an interesting story. So, I want to tell you how I moved to Berlin with 30 euro and then stayed there for 8 years. And how I did it will amaze you. And it's an interesting story to say the least. In 2011, I decided that I was going to move from Melbourne to London. So I should say, originally I'm actually born in Perth. And after I had kind of seen enough of Perth and done my thing there, I thought I want to move to a bigger city. I want to be where the big smoke is. So in 2007, I moved to Melbourne. At the time, I absolutely loved Melbourne. It was only 3.6 million people living there. You could still find parks in the city on the weekend. You could still go to specials where you could get $8 jugs or $10 steaks. And it was a great place to live, full of entertainment. Not that it's a good thing, but you could still smoke inside, and the music venues and the clubs and the bars weren't getting discouraged from the rules and regulations that stopped certain groups of people being able to go out. Now, it's not all about partying and all about that, but I work in the entertainment and media industry. So that is just the world I live in. After living in Melbourne for a couple of years, I wanted something even bigger. So I thought, I'm gonna move to London. And because my mum's from Britain, I had a British passport, so that made things easier for me. Anyway, so I go over to London in 2011, and then I realize maybe the city just isn't for me. As much as I liked it, there's just something I wasn't really vibing about it. So I thought, well, look, I'm just going to keep traveling around Europe because at the time the UK was still a part of the EU and I could technically live anywhere in Europe. So I kept traveling around and I went to Budapest, I went to Prague, I went to Croatia, I went to all these different places. And while I was on my travels, I kept asking everybody, what is your favorite city when you traveled? And at the time, the name Berlin kept coming up over and over again. And to be honest, there wasn't so much hype surrounding Berlin back in 2011. But I did know that it was a much cheaper city to live in. So I thought, look, why not? I'll give it a go. So after a few months of traveling around Europe, I ended up moving to Berlin. Now, while I was there, I wasn't particularly looking for a job and I kind of went through a bit of a little breakup. And so I wasn't particularly in the best mindset, and my mum came and visited me and I was a little bit depressed and she could see that and she said, Carl, do you want to go back to Australia? And I said, yeah, okay. So I went back to Australia and I'll tell you what, it just wasn't the same. After traveling the world for a year, my eyes had been opened up to all these new possibilities, all these new realities, all these new cultures and all these new different ways of life. And I thought, you know, the grass sometimes is greener on the other side, or at least it was just something new and exciting that I hadn't experienced before. And while I have the opportunity to live in Europe, why not give it a go? Anyway, coming back, if I'm completely honest with you, I came back feeling like a bit of a failure. I told all my friends I was going to move to London, and then about 10 months later, I returned to Melbourne, just feeling more lost than I ever did, because I'd let all my friends know I was leaving. I'd left my job, I'd left all the things behind at my family, and prior to leaving, I'd sold all my possessions. Anyway, so I came back and just wasn't feeling right about it. I got myself in a bit of a bad living situation. When I get back, I had to start to rebuild my life and, you know, redecide, like, is Melbourne the place for me? Do I give Europe another go? I tried, but ultimately I ended up getting a lease for a house, and then sadly I got some kind of bad roommates in who didn't end up paying the bills. And then a few months later I ended up getting a call from the landlord basically saying, hey, the rent hasn't been paid in 3 months. Now, while me and the other roommate had paid rent, the other two people living there hadn't. And I didn't know this. Stupidly on me, I didn't get them on the lease just because I was a trusting person. Long story short, I had to tell the landlord, kick them out, and I personally had to pay back all of their rent along with the entire bond for the place because they had trashed the place. This led me to kind of, well, feel a bit angry with the world and the situation, and I thought, you know, stuff this, I'm gonna go back to Berlin. I felt like I didn't really give it a go. At the time, I just got into filmmaking and I wanted to make my first feature film. But I had pretty much no money left. I had enough money to book myself a one-way ticket to Europe. Then I had 30 euro in my pocket, which at the time could get me about 2 nights in a hostel. I didn't go there with no plan at all. I went there with an idea to make a film. And that film was a documentary about what would it be like to become a street performer.
Today I'm going to do my first day busking. Max is still on his way here because he had a detour with teeth.
And where I got this idea from was during my time while I had been back in Melbourne, while I was filming some bands for my job, I'd film a lot of live concerts. So one of my friends said, hey, could you come film us busking on the street? So I went out and filmed them, and between them, they ended up making over $500. And I gotta say, I was really shocked. I didn't think street performers could make that kind of money. And I thought, you know, this would be an interesting experiment for a movie, for a documentary, to put myself in the shoes of a street performer, never having performed on the street before, see if I can survive for 6 months just doing that. And I'll film it all and see what happens. This ultimately led me to moving to Berlin just with a little over 30 euro in my pocket. So what happened next? I went out on the street, I took my guitar out, I played, and I made about $2 because, to be honest, I sucked. And I thought, what have you done, Carl? How are you going to make this film? How are you going to survive for 6 months? So prior to flying over, I had actually been over at a family friend's house and they had some little children. They were showing me all these stupid YouTube videos on the internet. And at the time, even though YouTube had been around for a few years, it's certainly not as big as it is now. But they were showing me that people were making money and getting all these views from doing stupid videos. So I decided to buy a latex horse mask. Long story short, after failing to busk and earn any money, after 2 days of failing to make any serious money, I thought, well, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to get like a hostel for the next night? How am I going to live? How am I going to finish this film? I thought, look, I'm going to put on this horse mask and play, and maybe people will find it funny or something. So in Melbourne, I'd seen this other busker, this guy called the Funky Bunny, that dressed up as a bunny and just played bass. Although I got to say, he was actually talented. But the costume kind of just made it a little bit funny, a little bit more entertaining, and he like swiveled his head around, and so that kind of inspired me. So I start playing, but it's really freaking hot in this latex horse mask. It's summer, it's 30 degrees, and I'm just dripping with sweat. So I decide to take my shirt off. And then I take my shirt off, and then all of a sudden, I'm getting more tips. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I'm just going to take my pants off too. And that day, I made the most money I ever had. More than enough to pay for a hostel for the night, and the next night, and the day after. So I went and I caught up with the one friend that I knew in Berlin, and I said, okay, you're not going to believe what I did today. I went out in the street, put on a horse mask, and pretty much stripped down to my underwear and played guitar next to the Berlin Wall. And I made all this money. And he said, dude, why don't you just make that your thing? Why don't you do that every day? And he said to me, why don't you call yourself the Naked Horse? And he's like, you can have that. So I did. And then the next day I went out and played and I made money. And the next day I went out again and played and I made money. And so on and so on. Until certain things started to happen. People started to wonder, why was this person doing this? And what the hell is this guy doing? And then I started to have pictures of me in magazines and news articles. There was me on television. The Deutsche Welle, which is like one of the biggest news agencies in Germany, wanted to interview me. Then I ended up doing a thing with Washington Post, and it all just kind of got out of hand and went a bit viral. Long story short, I made the movie, and 8 years later, I still kept performing as this horse, as the naked horse. And through that opportunity, that led me to make all the friends I had. It led me to experience a different world. And it took away the fear of giving something new a go. And I must say, this was one of the biggest life-changing experiences of my life. And I know what you're thinking. You sound crazy. But look, I'm going to show you a couple of clips. And if you want to watch the movie, it's actually now online for free. It's been online for a few years now. That was filmed in 2013 and it came out in 2014. Now, actually 10 years later, I went back last year and I made a sequel to the movie, a follow-up to all the things that had changed, to how people survived during the lockdown, especially the street musicians, people that could only make money from doing this, and all the interesting stories that happened to me over those years. This is a long story and it is a long movie, so I'm just going to leave it there. But I just want to show you, if you really want to do something, just go out and do it.